I stood in the carpeted hallway of the St. Regis Hotel wearing a $400 bridesmaid dress I paid for myself. My hands were wrapped around a heavy black binder. I knocked twice on the thick oak door of the bridal suite. I was not there to fix the bride's veil. I was not there to pour mimosas. I was there to collect a $112,400 debt from the two people who were supposed to protect me, my own parents. What happened when that door opened dismantled a wedding and ended my brother's life as he knew it. Welcome back to Elena Vengeance, where we share the stories of family betrayal and the quiet calculations it takes to balance the scales. How old were you when you realized your family dynamic was toxic? Drop your age in the comments and be sure to subscribe. Now let us get into the ledger. My name is Bella Thompson. I am a 26-year-old financial auditor living in Minnesota. But before I stood outside that bridal suite, the math started 4 years earlier. It was a freezing Tuesday morning in November during my junior year at the University of Minnesota. The radiator in my cramped off-campus apartment was clanking. I sat at a chipped laminate desk with a mug of cheap coffee, logging into my student portal to pay the spring tuition. My grandmother had set up a Uniform Transfers to Minors Act trust account for me before she passed away. When she handed me the bank paperwork at 16 years old, her hands were paper-thin and frail. She pulled me close and whispered that this money was so I would never have to be financially dependent on men like my father. The account had $68,000 in it, enough to get me through my senior year and leave a cushion to start my adult life. I typed in my routing numbers. The screen refreshed. The balance read $0.00. I refreshed the page 3 times. I checked the transaction history. A single outbound wire transfer had drained the entire account 2 days prior. The authorized signature belonged to the custodian of the trust, David Thompson, my father. My phone felt heavy when I dialed his number. I expected panic. I expected him to tell me our identity had been stolen. He answered on the second ring. The sound of a sports radio talk show played in the background. "Dad, the trust account is empty. The money is gone." His sigh carried no weight. "I know, Bella. I transferred it on Friday. Julian is launching his tech app, and he needed a seed round to get the prototype off the ground. He needed it more than you did right now." Julian was my 29-year-old brother, the son who could do no wrong. The son who had dropped out of 3 different degree programs while my parents covered his rent and car payments. "You gave my college fund to Julian." My voice was flat. I did not scream. The cold from the window glass seemed to seep straight through my ribs. How am I supposed to pay for the spring semester? "You are a smart girl, Bella." His tone shifted to that dismissive cadence he reserved for waiters and telemarketers. "You will figure it out. Julian is on the verge of something big. Do not be selfish." He hung up. I sat in the silence of my apartment, listening to the dial tone. I opened my personal checking account in a new browser tab. A red negative sign stared back at me. I had a $34 overdraft fee from buying a used statistics textbook the day before. That negative $34 hurt worse than the missing $68,000. It was proof of my undeniable isolation. David had committed fiduciary fraud as the custodian of my trust, but calling the police meant destroying my family and facing a lengthy legal battle I could not afford. I did not cry. Crying is a luxury for people who have a safety net. I put on my winter coat and my boots. I walked 2 miles through 6 inches of fresh Minnesota snow to the campus financial aid office. I sat in a plastic chair across from a weary counselor and signed my name on a private student loan with a predatory 9% interest rate. I bound myself to a decade of debt while my brother played Silicon Valley CEO with my grandmother's money. But as my pen scratched across the bottom of the promissory note, I noticed a clause in the fine print about financial liability. It planted a seed in my mind. I was a junior studying finance. My father assumed I would just absorb the loss. He forgot that accountants do not forgive debts. They compound them. The reality of a 9% interest rate does not hit you all at once. It creeps into your routine like a draft under a poorly sealed window, altering the temperature of your entire life before you even realize you are shivering. By the second week of December, my existence had narrowed into a relentless cycle of survival. I took on 3 jobs to cover basic living expenses and the initial interest payments on the private loan. My alarm went off at 3:45 every morning. I worked the opening shift at a campus coffee shop where the smell of scalded milk and stale espresso beans clung to my clothes long after I clocked out. At 3 in the afternoon, I transitioned to the university library, front desk, scanning barcodes until my eyes ached. At 9, I retreated to my freezing apartment to do freelance data entry for a medical supply company until 1 in the morning. 4 hours of sleep, then repeat. My mother called on a Tuesday afternoon. I was walking across the campus quad. The Minnesota wind chill was hovering around -12 degrees. The cold bit through my thin wool coat, but I answered on the second ring because ignoring Susan Thompson only resulted in more frequent calls. Her voice came through the receiver crisp and unbothered, accompanied by the faint clinking of silverware. She was likely sitting in her heated sunroom enjoying a late lunch. "Hello, Bella," she said. Her tone carried that forced, breezy quality she used when she wanted to pretend our family was starring in a television commercial. "I wanted to check in. Your father mentioned you were acting a little rigid on the phone last month about the trust account." I shifted my phone to my other ear, trying to regain feeling in my fingers. Rigid is one word for it, Mom. I had to take out a private loan to stay enrolled. Susan sighed. It was a delicate, practiced sound, designed to make me feel like I was being unreasonable. "We all have to make sacrifices right now, Bella. Julian is under an immense amount of pressure. His seed round of funding got delayed by the investors. The tech market is very volatile. He needed that capital to keep the app afloat. Your father and I just want you to see the bigger picture. You should view your tuition money as an investment in the family legacy. When his company takes off, he will take care of all of us." I stopped walking. The wind whipped snow across my face, but I barely felt it. An investment in the family legacy. She had rehearsed that phrase. It sounded like something she read in a Silicon Valley memoir. My parents had never asked for my permission to invest my future into my brother's delusions. They simply took it and expected me to applaud their business acumen. "I cannot afford my January rent, Mom." I stated the fact clearly, without a trace of pleading. I was not asking for a handout. I was testing her. I wanted to see how deep her devotion to Julian's illusion ran. "Oh, honey," Susan murmured, her voice dropping an octave to simulate sympathy. "We are stretched so thin right now. Your father had to dip into his retirement savings to help Julian secure a server host for the application. We simply do not have the liquidity to send you a check this month." "You have those jobs, though, right? You are so resilient, Bella. We are very proud of your work ethic." She hung up shortly after leaving me standing in the snow. I did not throw my phone. I did not scream into the frigid air. I walked the remaining 3 blocks to the library. I sat down at a quiet computer terminal in the back corner. I opened a new spreadsheet. In the first column, I typed the date. In the second column, I typed the duration of the call. In the third column, I transcribed her exact words. "Investment in the family legacy. We do not have the liquidity." I saved the document. It was the first entry in what would become a very long, meticulous record. A week later, the physical toll of my schedule reached a breaking point. It was a Thursday night. I had just finished my data entry shift. My bank account balance was $92. I needed that to cover my electric bill. Dinner consisted of a 39-cent package of chicken-flavored ramen noodles. I sat at my chipped desk, waiting for the cheap plastic kettle to boil. When I poured the water over the dried noodles, the artificial salty steam filled the cramped kitchen. I reached into my drawer and pulled out a plastic fork. One of the outer prongs was snapped off halfway, leaving a jagged edge. I was too exhausted to care. While the noodles softened, I unlocked my phone to distract myself from the silence of the apartment. I opened Instagram. The algorithm placed my brother's profile at the very top of my feed. Julian had posted a new photograph 20 minutes earlier. The image was high resolution, likely taken by a professional photographer. Julian was standing in a brightly lit, pristine parking garage. He was wearing a tailored wool overcoat that cost more than my entire semester housing budget. He was leaning casually against the hood of a brand new, matte black Tesla Model 3. The ambient light gleamed off the flawless, expensive paint job. He had a smug, relaxed smile on his face, the kind of smile worn by a man who has never faced a single consequence in his entire life. I looked down at the caption beneath the photo. Hustle pays off. Big moves coming for the company this quarter. Grateful for the grind. I sat perfectly still. The plastic fork pinched my lower lip, but I did not blink. The juxtaposition was so stark, it almost felt staged. I was eating sodium-laden broth with a broken utensil in a room that was 58 degrees. My brother was posing with a luxury electric vehicle, boasting about his hustle. A tech startup in the seed stage does not purchase a matte black Tesla for its founder. Legitimate venture capital funds have strict spending covenants. Angel investors demand quarterly burn rate reports. Seed money is allocated for software engineers, server architecture, and targeted marketing campaigns. It is not allocated for imported wool coats and six-figure luxury sedans. My analytical training kicked in, drowning out the initial wave of betrayal. Julian was not building a company. He was building an illusion. He was using the $68,000 stolen from my Uniform Transfers to Minors Act account to fund a rich lifestyle, playing the role of a successful tech mogul for his social media audience. He was embezzling the funds. My thumb hovered over the comments section. A part of me, the younger sister who just wanted her parents to love her equally, wanted to type the truth. I wanted to publicly demand my tuition money back. I wanted to humiliate him in front of his wealthy friends and fake investors. But accountants know that premature exposure ruins an audit. If I confronted him now, he would hide the assets. My father would defend him. My mother would call me jealous. I would look like a bitter, struggling college student trying to tear down her successful older brother. I needed proof. I needed a paper trail that could not be dismissed as a misunderstanding. I closed the comments section. I held down the buttons on my phone and took a screenshot of the photograph. I zoomed in on the license plate and took another screenshot, ensuring the alphanumeric sequence was clearly legible. I opened my secure cloud storage drive. I created a new master folder. I typed the names slowly, letting the intent settle into my mind. The invoice. I uploaded the screenshots. I added the spreadsheet containing the log of my mother's phone call. I created a subfolder for banking routing numbers and another for corporate tax filings. The anger that had been simmering in my chest crystallized into something cold, hard, and infinitely more dangerous. I did not want an apology anymore. I wanted my money back, with interest. I ate the ramen noodles in silence, chewing methodically. The broken plastic fork scraped against the bottom of the styrofoam cup. I realized that sitting in Minneapolis scrolling through social media was not going to give me the financial data I needed to balance the ledger. Julian was careless. A man who buys a Tesla with stolen money leaves receipts lying around. He believes he is untouchable because our parents have shielded him from reality for 29 years. Christmas was 4 days away. I had originally planned to pick up extra holiday shifts at the coffee shop to avoid going back to my parents' house. I hated the idea of sitting in their living room, pretending we were a happy family, while my student loan accumulated daily interest. But the strategy had changed. I needed to see his operations up close. I needed to know exactly how they were funneling the cash. I needed employer identification numbers and bank statements. I picked up my phone and sent a brief text message to my mother. I got my shift covered. I will be home for Christmas Eve. Her reply came 3 minutes later, filled with festive emojis. That is wonderful news, Bella. Julian will be so happy to see you. I turned off my phone screen. I rinsed the styrofoam cup in the sink and threw the broken fork into the trash can. I was going home for the holidays, but I was not going as a daughter or a sister. I was going as an auditor. And my first target was walking right into the trap. The reality of a 9% interest rate does not hit you all at once. It creeps into your routine like a draft under a poorly sealed window, altering the temperature of your entire life before you even realize you are shivering. By the second week of December, my existence had narrowed into a relentless cycle of survival. I took on 3 jobs to cover basic living expenses and the initial interest payments on the private loan. My alarm went off at 3:45 every morning. I worked the opening shift at a campus coffee shop where the smell of scalded milk and stale espresso beans clung to my clothes long after I clocked out. At 3 in the afternoon, I transitioned to the university library front desk, scanning barcodes until my eyes ached. At 9, I retreated to my freezing apartment to do freelance data entry for a medical supply company until 1 in the morning. 4 hours of sleep, then repeat. My mother called on a Tuesday afternoon. I was walking across the campus quad. The Minnesota wind chill was hovering around -12 degrees. The cold bit through my thin wool coat, but I answered on the second ring because ignoring Susan Thompson only resulted in more frequent calls. Her voice came through the receiver crisp and unbothered, accompanied by the faint clinking of silverware. She was likely sitting in her heated sunroom, enjoying a late lunch. "Hello, Bella," she said. Her tone carried that forced, breezy quality she used when she wanted to pretend our family was starring in a television commercial. "I wanted to check in. Your father mentioned you were acting a little rigid on the phone last month about the trust account." I shifted my phone to my other ear, trying to regain feeling in my fingers. Rigid is one word for it, Mom. I had to take out a private loan to stay enrolled. Susan sighed. It was a delicate, practiced sound, designed to make me feel like I was being unreasonable. "We all have to make sacrifices right now, Bella. Julian is under immense pressure. His seed round of funding got delayed by the investors. The tech market is very volatile. He needed that capital to keep the app afloat. Your father and I just want you to see the bigger picture. You should view your tuition money as an investment in the family legacy. When his company takes off, he will take care of all of us." I stopped walking. The wind whipped snow across my face, but I barely felt it. An investment in the family legacy. She had rehearsed that phrase. It sounded like something she read in a Silicon Valley memoir. My parents had never asked for my permission to invest my future into my brother's delusions. They simply took it and expected me to applaud their business acumen. "I cannot afford my January rent, Mom." I stated the fact clearly without a trace of pleading. I was not asking for a handout. I was testing her. I wanted to see how deep her devotion to Julian's illusion ran. "Oh, honey," Susan murmured, her voice dropping an octave to simulate sympathy. "We are stretched so thin right now. Your father had to dip into his retirement savings to help Julian secure a server host for the application. We simply do not have the liquidity to send you a check this month." "You have those jobs, though, right? You are resilient, Bella. We are proud of your work ethic." She hung up shortly after leaving me standing in the snow. I did not throw my phone. I did not scream into the frigid air. I walked the remaining 3 blocks to the library. I sat down at a quiet computer terminal in the back corner. I opened a new spreadsheet. In the first column, I typed the date. In the second column, I typed the duration of the call. In the third column, I transcribed her exact words. "Investment in the family legacy. We do not have the liquidity." I saved the document. It was the first entry in what would become a very long, meticulous record. A week later, the physical toll of my schedule reached a breaking point. It was a Thursday night. I had just finished my data entry shift. My bank account balance was $92. I needed that to cover my electric bill. Dinner consisted of a 39-cent package of chicken-flavored ramen noodles. I sat at my chipped desk waiting for the cheap plastic kettle to boil. When I poured the water over the dried noodles, the artificial salty steam filled the cramped kitchen. I reached into my drawer and pulled out a plastic fork. One of the outer prongs was snapped off halfway, leaving a jagged edge. I was exhausted. While the noodles softened, I unlocked my phone to distract myself from the silence of the apartment. I opened Instagram. The algorithm placed my brother's profile at the very top of my feed. Julian had posted a new photograph 20 minutes earlier. The image was high resolution, likely taken by a professional photographer. Julian was standing in a brightly lit, pristine parking garage. He was wearing a tailored wool overcoat that cost more than my entire semester housing budget. He was leaning casually against the hood of a brand new matte black Tesla Model 3. The ambient light gleamed off the flawless, expensive paint job. He had a smug, relaxed smile on his face, the kind of smile worn by a man who has never faced a single consequence in his entire life. I looked down at the caption beneath the photo. Hustle pays off. Big moves coming for the company this quarter. Grateful for the grind. I sat perfectly still. The plastic fork pinched my lower lip, but I did not blink. The juxtaposition was so stark, it almost felt staged. I was eating sodium-laden broth with a broken utensil in a room that was 58 degrees. My brother was posing with a luxury electric vehicle, boasting about his hustle. A tech startup in the seed stage does not purchase a matte black Tesla for its founder. Legitimate venture capital funds have strict spending covenants. Angel investors demand quarterly burn rate reports. Seed money is allocated for software engineers, server architecture, and targeted marketing campaigns. It is not allocated for imported wool coats and luxury sedans. My analytical training kicked in, drowning out the initial wave of betrayal. Julian was not building a company. He was building an illusion. He was using the $68,000 stolen from my Uniform Transfers to Minors Act account to fund a rich lifestyle, playing the role of a successful tech mogul for his social media audience. He was embezzling the funds. My thumb hovered over the comments section. A part of me, the younger sister who just wanted her parents to love her equally, wanted to type the truth. I wanted to publicly demand my tuition money back. I wanted to humiliate him in front of his wealthy friends and fake investors. But accountants know that premature exposure ruins an audit. If I confronted him now, he would hide the assets. My father would defend him. My mother would call me jealous. I would look like a bitter, struggling college student trying to tear down her successful older brother. I needed proof. I needed a paper trail that could not be dismissed as a misunderstanding. I closed the comments section. I held down the buttons on my phone and took a screenshot of the photograph. I zoomed in on the license plate and took another screenshot, ensuring the alphanumeric sequence was clearly legible. I opened my secure cloud storage drive. I created a new master folder. I typed the names slowly, letting the intent settle into my mind. The Invoice. I uploaded the screenshots. I added the spreadsheet containing the log of my mother's phone call. I created a subfolder for banking routing numbers and another for corporate tax filings. The anger that had been simmering in my chest crystallized into something cold, hard, and infinitely dangerous. I did not want an apology anymore. I wanted my money back with interest. I ate the ramen noodles in silence, chewing methodically. The broken plastic fork scraped against the bottom of the styrofoam cup. I realized that sitting in Minneapolis scrolling through social media was not going to give me the financial data I needed to balance the ledger. Julian was careless. A man who buys a Tesla with stolen money leaves receipts lying around. He He believes he is untouchable because our parents have shielded him from reality for 29 years. Christmas was 4 days away. I had originally planned to pick up extra holiday shifts at the coffee shop to avoid going back to my parents' house. I hated the idea of sitting in their living room, pretending we were a happy family, while my student loan accumulated daily interest. But the strategy had changed. I needed to see his operations up close. I needed to know exactly how they were funneling the cash. I needed employer identification numbers and bank statements. I picked up my phone and sent a brief text message to my mother. I got my shift covered. I will be home for Christmas Eve. Her reply came 3 minutes later, filled with festive emojis. That is wonderful news, Bella. Julian will be so happy to see you. I turned off my phone screen. I rinsed the styrofoam cup in the sink and threw the broken fork into the trash can. I was going home for the holidays, but I was not going as a daughter or a sister. I was going as an auditor, and my first target was walking right into the trap. The new semester began in January. The ice on the campus sidewalks was thick and unyielding. I walked into the Academic Advising Center on the second floor of the business building. I sat across from my counselor and requested a formal change to my degree program. I was no longer a general finance major. I declared my specialty in forensic accounting. General finance teaches you how money grows. Forensic accounting teaches you how money hides. It is the science of financial autopsies. I needed the tools to dissect a crime. During that terrible Christmas visit, I had spent less than 2 hours inside my parents' house. Before I walked out the door, leaving my plate of turkey untouched, I had stood in the kitchen. A manila envelope rested on the granite island. It contained tax documents for my brother's startup. I did not steal the folder. I simply memorized the 9-digit employer identification number printed on the top right corner. 9 numbers. That was the only weapon I needed. It was a Tuesday night. I was alone in the basement of the university library. The fluorescent overhead lights hummed a low, steady frequency. I logged into the Secretary of State online business registry. My fingers hovered over the keyboard. I typed the 9 digits of Julian's corporate ID. I pressed enter. I expected to find a single, struggling, limited liability company. Instead, the screen populated with a complex web of registrations. Julian had not incorporated one business. He had incorporated 3. They had vague, overlapping names: Apex Digital, Apex Solutions Group, Apex Consulting. My eyes scanned the registration dates. They were formed within weeks of each other, right after my uniform transfers to Minors Act account had been drained. I pulled up the public filing histories. The structure was a classic textbook shell game. Julian was not coding a revolutionary application. He was moving capital in a circle. He deposited my stolen $68,000 into the first company. Then he drafted fake invoices and paid that exact amount to the second company for consulting services. The second company then transferred the funds to the third company under the guise of licensing fees. To an untrained eye or a lazy loan officer looking at a single ledger, it appeared as though each entity was generating independent revenue. He was fabricating cash flow. By artificially inflating his corporate income, Julian was able to walk into a commercial bank and present himself as a thriving enterprise. The intersecting layers of his fraud were sloppy, arrogant, and highly illegal. He was securing commercial credit lines based on phantom revenue. During my brief Christmas visit, I had also managed to snap a quick photograph of a discarded corporate credit card statement protruding from the recycling bin. I opened the image file on my monitor. I parsed the expenses line by line: high-end steakhouses, domestic flights, premium hotel bookings. Then my eyes locked onto a peculiar charge dated November 14th. It was a $4,000 expense, categorized under hardware procurement. The vendor name was abbreviated. It read as a generic logistics supplier. I ran the merchant code through a global database. The vendor was not a computer supplier. It was a bespoke jewelry boutique in downtown Minneapolis. $4,000. November 14th. I opened a new tab and navigated to Instagram. I went straight to the profile of Julian's girlfriend, Jessica. I scrolled back through her timeline to the middle of November. There it was, a photograph of Jessica holding her left hand up to the camera. The background was a dimly lit romantic restaurant. A brilliant cut diamond sparkled on her ring finger. The caption read that she had said yes to her best friend. I stared at the gemstone on my glowing monitor. A wave of profound nausea washed over me. That was not just a piece of jewelry. That was a semester of my tuition. My grandmother's sacrifice meant to secure my independence was sitting on another woman's finger. Julian had categorized his engagement ring as corporate hardware to evade taxes. The nausea faded quickly, replaced by a sharp, clinical focus. I leaned closer to the screen. If Julian was acquiring commercial bank loans using fabricated revenue streams, the underwriters would still require collateral. Banks do not hand out unsecured cash to 29-year-old founders without assets. Julian owned nothing of value. His Tesla was leased. His apartment was rented. I needed to know what the bank was holding as security. I navigated away from the business registry and opened the county property tax database. I typed in the names David and Susan Thompson. The search results generated a list of public deeds associated with my childhood home. I clicked on the most recent filing. A digital document loaded. It was a warranty deed carrying a secondary lien. I read the legal jargon twice to ensure I was not making a mistake. The text was undeniable. My parents had quietly leveraged the equity in their 4-bedroom house. They had signed as personal guarantors on a $250,000 small business loan for Julian's primary shell company. They had bet the roof over their heads on a ghost. I sat back in the hard wooden library chair. The air in the room felt remarkably thin. I was holding a live grenade of information. My parents were underwriting a federal crime. If Julian defaulted on that commercial loan, the bank would not just seize his fake business. They would foreclose on the house my parents had lived in for 30 years. Susan and David would lose everything they had spent their lives building. The instinct of a daughter is to pick up the phone. I reached for my device. I could call my mother. I could explain the shell game. I could warn my father that his son was engaged in wire fraud and embezzlement. I could save them from the impending ruin. My thumb rested on my father's contact name. But then the memory of his voice echoed in my ears. He needed it more than you did. You will figure it out. Do not be selfish. They had frozen me out. They had chosen their golden son and sacrificed my future to protect his ego. They did not want my protection. They wanted my silence. I put the phone face down on the desk. I connected my laptop to the network printer in the corner of the library. I hit print on the business registrations. I printed the property deeds. I printed the commercial lien. The machine whirred to life, spitting out warm pages of undeniable evidence. I gathered the stack of papers. I aligned the edges, tapping them against the table. I opened my heavy backpack and slid the documents into the thick black binder. The binder was growing heavy. The hunt was no longer just about recovering my $68,000. It was about documenting a spectacular collapse. I knew the timeline was ticking. A Ponzi scheme of this nature relies on constant new capital to survive. Julian would inevitably run out of phantom revenue. Until that day, I would remain in the shadows, letting them believe I was just a struggling student who had accepted her defeat. I packed up my belongings and walked out into the freezing night. 2 years of silent accumulation lay ahead of me. 2 years of watching them perform their wealthy charade while I mapped out their destruction. The next milestone would be my college graduation. I assumed they would at least show up to watch me cross the stage. I was wrong. 2 years evaporated into a relentless blur of double shifts and forensic accounting textbooks. I did not take spring breaks. I did not attend football games or socialize at campus bars. My entire collegiate experience was reduced to a math equation. I needed to finish my degree as fast as humanly possible to escape the crushing gravity of my high-yield private loan. By May of my senior year, my efforts materialized into a tangible result. I earned the designation of summa cum laude, graduating at the very top of my class. I was 22 years old, armed with a specialized financial degree, and carrying a secret black binder that dictated my every move. I sent formal graduation invitations to my parents out of a rigid sense of protocol. I ordered the thick, cream-colored cardstock with the university seal embossed in gold foil. I wrote their address on the envelope with a steady hand. A week later, the reply card arrived in my mailbox. A neat checkmark sat next to the line indicating they would attend. I stared at that piece of paper for a long time. A naive, lingering fragment of my childhood hoped they would actually show up. I thought perhaps the sight of their daughter crossing a stage with highest honors might momentarily pierce the synthetic reality they had constructed around Julian. The morning of commencement arrived with a crisp, bright Minnesota chill. I stood in the cramped bathroom of my off-campus apartment, zipping up my cheap black polyester graduation gown. I adjusted the gold honor cords around my neck. The fabric was scratchy, but it felt like armor. My phone vibrated on the edge of the porcelain sink. The screen lit up with a text message from my mother. I picked up the device. The text read, "Julian has a critical investor pitch today. We have to be there for moral support. So proud of you, though." I read the words 3 times. A critical investor pitch on a Saturday morning in late May. Legitimate venture capital firms do not hold seed round pitches on weekends. Corporate offices are closed. I knew from my ongoing surveillance of his LLC filings that there were no real investors. The pitch was likely a contrived brunch meeting with Jessica's father. Julian needed his parents there to project the illusion of generational wealth and stability. David and Susan had looked at the schedule and made their choice. They decided that maintaining a financial charade for their golden son was more important than witnessing the daughter they had robbed receive her diploma. I did not reply to the text message. I deleted it. I looked at my reflection in the mirror. The girl who had cried over a $34 overdraft fee was gone. The university fieldhouse was a cavernous arena filled with folding chairs and the overwhelming scent of hairspray and nervous sweat. The brass band played Pomp and Circumstance echoing off the high steel rafters. I marched down the center aisle with my graduating class. My assigned seat was near the front. I sat down and looked over my shoulder, scanning the vast audience. I found row 4. I counted the seats from the aisle. Seat 12, seat 13. They were empty. The 2 metal folding chairs sat vacant, surrounded by a sea of proud, cheering families. To my left sat a classmate named Haley. She had 14 relatives occupying an entire section of the bleachers. They were wearing matching, custom-printed shirts. They held up oversized cardboard cutouts of Haley's face. The noise of their celebration was deafening. I sat in silence, clutching the program in my lap. I looked from Haley's loud, joyful support system back to my 2 empty chairs. When the dean called my name, I walked across the wide stage. The wood creaked beneath my heels. I accepted the leather-bound diploma cover. It was heavy in my hands. I paused for the official photograph, staring into the flash of the camera. There was no applause from row 4. There was no father whistling or mother wiping away a proud tear. I walked down the opposite stairs and returned to my seat. During the remainder of the ceremony, a profound psychological shift occurred inside my mind. Staring at those empty seats, the last fragile thread of familial obligation snapped clean in half. If David and Susan had shown up, perhaps a small part of me would have felt guilty about the black binder waiting in my closet. By leaving those chairs vacant, they inadvertently freed me. They resigned from their roles as my parents. The emotional severance was permanent. They were no longer family. They were targets. They were debtors on my balance sheet, and I was going to collect every single cent. There was no celebratory steak dinner after the event. There were no photographs taken on the manicured campus lawn. I walked out of the arena alone, tossed my diploma onto the passenger seat of my rusted sedan, and drove back to my apartment. I spent the evening packing my life into cardboard boxes. I was leaving the university behind and entering the real world. The following Monday, I relocated to downtown Minneapolis. The skyline was a rigid grid of reflective glass and steel, mirroring the new architecture of my mind. I had secured a highly competitive position as a junior forensic auditor at a top-tier corporate logistics firm. The environment was clinical and unyielding. My colleagues were seasoned financial predators who hunted discrepancies in international shipping manifests and exposed corporate embezzlement. It was a zero-sum culture where weakness was punished and precision was rewarded. I fit right in. I was the quietest person in the office, analyzing data sets while the senior partners argued. They quickly learned I was a professional numbers killer. I could spot a fraudulent invoice buried in a 1,000-page ledger within minutes. On the first Friday of the month, my initial corporate direct deposit cleared into my checking account. I sat at my sleek glass desk overlooking the busy city streets and opened my banking application. The sum on the screen was staggering compared to the meager barista wages I had survived on for years. The temptation to upgrade my life was potent. I could walk into a dealership and finance a reliable vehicle. I could rent a luxury loft with floor-to-ceiling windows. I could buy a designer wardrobe. Instead, I opened a second browser window and logged into my private student loan portal. The principal balance had ballooned due to the daily accrued interest. The dashboard displayed a total debt of $72,000. The sight of that number no longer induced panic. It induced a cold, calculated focus. I linked my new corporate checking account to the loan servicer. I bypassed the minimum monthly payment requirement. I manually entered a custom transfer amount consuming 60% of my net income. I executed a double payment, striking a direct blow against the principal. I watched the loading icon spin until the confirmation receipt appeared on the screen. I was weaponizing my income. I refused to carry the vulnerability of debt into the war I was planning. I needed my own ledger to be impeccable before I exposed the rot in Julian's. The sun began to set, casting long shadows across my office floor. The building emptied out as my colleagues departed for weekend happy hours. I remained at my desk. The silence of the empty corporate floor was exactly what I needed. Now that I had access to the firm's proprietary tracing software, I possessed tools far more powerful than public business registries. I booted up the advanced investigative mainframe. It was time to look deeper into the subsidiary companies Julian was operating. I assumed he was just funneling the cash to maintain his fake tech mogul lifestyle. But as I typed his employer identification numbers into the global database, the software began to uncover a transactional history that defied simple vanity. The upcoming revelation would change the entire trajectory of my trap. It is a peculiar kind of isolation to be 23, earning a premier corporate salary, and living like a ghost. My colleagues spent their weekends touring renovated lofts in the North Loop and leasing imported sports cars. I spent my weekends eating meal-prepped rice and chicken in a bare apartment with no television. Every other Friday, 60% of my net pay vanished into the relentless black hole of my private student loan. The principal balance was shrinking, but the pace required clinical discipline. I stayed at my glass desk long after the sun dipped below the Minneapolis skyline. The cleaning crew learned to vacuum around my chair without speaking to me. When the corporate floor was entirely empty, I minimized my assigned client files and opened the proprietary forensic tracing software restricted to senior partners and specialized personnel. The program was a digital scalpel capable of slicing through international banking firewalls and obfuscated routing numbers. I typed the employer identification number for Julian's primary limited liability company into the search query. For months, I had operated under a specific assumption. I believed my brother was a narcissist who squandered my college fund on a fake tech mogul lifestyle to impress his social media followers. I assumed the money bought expensive dinners, designer suits, and leased cars. But as the tracing software mapped the outbound wire transfers, an entirely different pattern emerged. The funds were not staying within the local luxury economy. They were bypassing domestic banks. I watched the green digital lines connect Julian's corporate account to a series of holding companies registered in the Cayman Islands and Costa Rica. I ran a cross-reference on the receiving entities. The screen populated with federal risk warnings. The holding companies were known payment processors for unregulated offshore sports betting platforms. I leaned closer to the monitor. The glow illuminated the sterile darkness of my office. Julian was not coding a revolutionary application. He was not hiring software developers. He was placing high-stakes wagers on international soccer matches and collegiate basketball games. He was placing bets in $10,000 increments. He lost consistently. The tech startup was nothing more than a hollow shell designed to launder money to foreign bookmakers. My brother was not a failed Silicon Valley visionary. He was an active, severe gambling addict. The revelation shifted the ground beneath my feet. If Julian was hemorrhaging cash at this staggering velocity, the original $68,000 from my uniform transfers to Minors Act account would have evaporated in weeks. Yet he had maintained his facade for years. The math dictated an external, ongoing source of capital. I adjusted my search parameters. I bypassed Julian's business credentials and initiated a deep financial scan on David and Susan Thompson. The database churned for 3 minutes before rendering a result. It was a joint checking account at a regional credit union linking David Thompson and Julian Thompson. I exported the transaction ledger to my desktop. Every time Julian's offshore betting accounts hit a critical deficit, David initiated a transfer from his personal retirement savings into the joint checking. The memo lines on the digital receipts were meticulously typed. Seed funding allocation, server expansion costs, venture capital bridge. My breath caught in my throat. My parents knew. They did not think he was building a legitimate enterprise. They were actively paying off his gambling debts under the guise of startup investments. The betrayal mutated from negligent ignorance into calculated complicity. They drained my future not because they believed in his potential, but because they needed to contain his sickness. David and Susan were pillars of the Grace Fellowship Country Club community. A daughter who took out student loans was a respectable narrative of building character. A son who owed hundreds of thousands of dollars to offshore syndicates was a social death sentence. They sacrificed my education to protect their pristine image. My phone vibrated against the glass desk, shattering the silence of the office. The caller identification displayed my mother's name. I let it ring. It forwarded to voicemail. A notification icon appeared on my screen. I put on my noise-canceling headphones and played the audio file. Susan's voice filtered through the speakers. She sounded out of breath. "Hi, Bella. I was just hoping to catch you. I saw your updated job title on LinkedIn, a forensic auditor. That sounds so impressive. Your father and I were wondering how the new position is treating you. I imagine a corporate firm like that compensates their talent very well. Give us a call when you can. The holidays are approaching, and family needs to stick together right now." She hung up. The subtext was so loud it was nearly deafening. She did not care about my career trajectory. She cared about my liquidity. Julian's betting losses were accelerating, and my parents were running out of home equity to cover his margins. They were grooming me for a financial request. They were circling my corporate salary like vultures. They assumed the quiet daughter who walked away 2 years ago would simply hand over her paycheck if they asked nicely. I removed the headphones. I opened the bottom drawer of my locked filing cabinet and pulled out the heavy black binder. It contained every property deed, every fake corporate registration, every offshore wire transfer, and every desperate voicemail transcript. I turned to the final tab labeled The Ledger. I updated the spreadsheet. I took the original stolen principal of $68,000. I applied the exact 8% compound interest rate of my private student loans. I calculated the duration of the theft down to the very day. The sum updated instantly in the bottom right corner of the document, $94,500. That was the cost of their illusion. I printed the updated page and snapped it into the metal rings of the binder. I locked the cabinet and gathered my wool coat. I walked out of the building into the cold night air. My parents were drowning in the undertow of my brother's addiction. They believed they could reach out and pull me down with them to stay afloat. They had no idea I was the one mapping the ocean floor. The trap required patience, but their desperation was making them careless. I just needed them to make one fatal, overt move. I needed to feed their false sense of security. The perfect opportunity to disarm them arrived unexpectedly, demanding a psychological maneuver I had never attempted before. When building a snare, you do not stand next to it holding a weapon. You step back. You scatter bait. You let the target convince themselves the territory is safe. After discovering the offshore betting accounts and my parents' complicity, I knew my silence was no longer enough. Silence breeds suspicion. If I remained a distant, bitter ghost, they would keep their guard up. I needed them to believe I had surrendered. I needed them to think the corporate world had softened my edges and that my new income had erased the memory of their theft. The opportunity presented itself in early October. An envelope arrived at my apartment. It was heavy cardstock featuring an elegant cursive font. Julian and Jessica were officially announcing their engagement. The wedding was set for the following spring. Included in the envelope was a small insert directing guests to a high-end retail registry. I sat at my kitchen counter, tracing the embossed letters of my brother's name. He was marrying the daughter of Thomas, a formidable local real estate developer. Jessica grew up in a world of country clubs and unshakable financial security. She had no idea she was preparing to legally bind herself to a man whose net worth was a terrifying negative number. I opened my laptop and navigated to the registry website. The list was a testament to their projected lifestyle. Crystal decanters, imported silk bedding, silverware forged in France. I bypassed the cheaper items and scrolled directly to the top-tier selections. I found a professional-grade Italian espresso machine priced at exactly $1,200. For a 23-year-old, paying down steep student debt, spending that much money on the brother who robbed her defies basic logic. But forensic accounting teaches you to view capital as a tool. That $1,200 was not a gift. It was an anesthetic. It was the price of admission into their inner circle. I clicked Purchase. The retailer offered an option to include a custom-printed card. I typed the message with deliberate, sugary warmth. I wrote, "Julian and Jessica, I am so incredibly happy for you both. Wishing you a lifetime of love and beautiful mornings. Congratulations, Bella." I read the words back to myself. It was the perfect performance. It communicated submission. It signaled that I had accepted my lower status in the family hierarchy and that I was willing to buy my way back into their good graces using my corporate paycheck. The delivery was executed 3 days later. The psychological return on my investment was instantaneous. My phone buzzed while I was sitting in my corner office reviewing a client audit. The text was from my father. It was the first time he had initiated contact without asking for a favor in 4 years. The message read, "We received the coffee maker. Very generous of you, Bella. Glad to see you are maturing and supporting your brother during this exciting time in his life. Family first." I read his text while looking out my floor-to-ceiling glass windows. Below me, the Minneapolis traffic moved in orderly lines. David actually believed I was seeking his approval. He interpreted my gift as an apology for being difficult about my stolen tuition. He thought I was finally falling in line. I picked up my phone. I did not type a paragraph. I did not demand an acknowledgement of the past. I simply sent back a single yellow smiling emoji. That smiling digital face locked the trap into place. Behind my sweet facade, the guillotine was being hoisted higher into the air, waiting for the perfect moment to drop. With their paranoia neutralized, I intensified my surveillance. While Julian planned a lavish wedding, his financial scaffolding was rotting from the inside out. The signs were subtle at first, but undeniable to a trained eye. I routinely checked the state motor vehicle registry through a public data broker. In late November, the registration for the matte black Tesla Model 3 was abruptly transferred back to the leasing dealership. A week later, a new registration appeared under Julian's name. It was a 7-year-old domestic sedan. He was bleeding cash to his bookies so fast he could no longer afford the monthly lease payment on his prop vehicle. The downgrade in his transportation was just the surface. I monitored the county court filings. 2 subcontractors who had provided IT services for his fake application filed civil claims for unpaid invoices. A local catering company filed a mechanic lien against his primary LLC for an unpaid event tab. His bank balances were dwindling in real time. The offshore syndicates do not offer grace periods. They demand liquidity. Julian was trapped in a downward spiral, scrambling to secure capital to maintain his wealthy illusion for Jessica's family, while his actual creditors closed in. My parents were feeling the squeeze right alongside him. I pulled their property tax records again. The grace period for their delayed property tax payment had expired. The county had officially attached a tax lien to my childhood home. They had exhausted their retirement savings funding Julian's gambling habit. They had maxed out the equity in their house. They had nothing left to leverage. David and Susan were standing on the edge of a cliff, holding their golden son's hand, dragging themselves toward the abyss, just to keep him from hitting the ground first. Every day, I went to work wearing a tailored suit, reviewing corporate ledgers and calculating exact penalty fees. Every night, I returned to my apartment and updated the black binder. The total owed to me was climbing steadily. I watched the calendar pages turn. The wedding date crept closer. Julian and Jessica mailed the formal invitations. My envelope arrived adorned with expensive calligraphy. I was invited to the rehearsal dinner and the ceremony. I placed the invitation on my refrigerator next to the printed property lien records. The contrast between the pristine white wedding card and the stark legal warnings served as my daily motivation. The fragile ecosystem they had constructed could only sustain itself for so long before gravity took over. I knew the breaking point was imminent. The only variable was how they would choose to crash. I anticipated a slow, steady decline, culminating in a quiet bankruptcy filing. I underestimated the sheer audacity of their entitlement. They did not want to face reality. They wanted a bailout. It happened on a Thursday evening in early February. I was in my kitchen, wiping down the counter. The winter wind was howling outside, rattling the window panes. My phone illuminated on the marble surface. A text message banner appeared. It was David. He had bypassed the polite small talk. The facade of the proud father congratulating his maturing daughter had vanished. The message contained just 2 sentences. "Bella, please call. We have an emergency." I stared at the glowing screen. An emergency. The word tasted like copper in my mouth. I knew exactly what kind of crisis David was facing, and it had nothing to do with health or safety. It had everything to do with a bank account hitting zero and a bookie demanding a wire transfer. He thought the daughter who sent a luxury espresso machine would open her checkbook to save the family. I picked up the device. I did not dial his number right away. I let him sweat for 10 minutes, preparing myself to dissect the lies they were about to weave. I let 10 full minutes pass. The silence in my apartment was punctuated only by the winter wind rattling the window glass. I wanted David to sit with his panic. I wanted the desperation to marinate before I finally picked up the phone and dialed his number. He answered before the first ring finished, indicating he'd been staring at the screen, waiting for his lifeline to call back. "Bella, thank God," he exhaled. His breathing was ragged and shallow. To an untrained ear, his voice conveyed genuine terror. "It is your mother. We are at St. Jude's Clinic. She collapsed this afternoon." I placed my phone flat on the cold marble kitchen counter and activated the speaker function. I did not gasp. I did not ask if she was conscious. "What happened, Dad?" I asked, keeping my vocal cadence entirely neutral. He launched into a frantic, disjointed narrative. He claimed Susan had experienced a sudden arterial blockage requiring an immediate, specialized surgical intervention. He painted a vivid picture of frightened doctors and urgent consultations. Then he delivered the financial hook. "The clinic requires a $15,000 upfront payment, Bella. Our insurance policy has a high deductible clause for out-of-network specialists, and they will not secure the surgical suite until the cash clears the billing department. We do not have the liquidity right now. I need you to wire the money to my account. I will pay you back the moment we refinance the house next month. Please, Bella, she is your mother." I listened to his performance. The emotional delivery was commendable, but the underlying logistics were a disaster. Federal healthcare regulations dictate that emergency medical providers cannot deny life-saving treatment based on the lack of an immediate upfront cash payment. A premier facility like St. Jude's would stabilize a patient experiencing a cardiac event and send the itemized bill weeks later. A $15,000 cash demand at the admissions desk for a sudden arterial blockage is a fiction created by someone who does not understand basic hospital administration. While he spun his web of medical urgency, I opened my laptop. I navigated directly to the County Treasury Public Portal. I bypassed the standard search features and entered the parcel identification number for my parents' property. The system churned for a few seconds before the ledger loaded onto my glowing screen. A bright red status indicator flagged the residential parcel. The classification read, delinquent. I scrolled down to the itemized penalty section. The exact amount owed, including municipal late fees, accumulated interest, and legal processing charges, was $14,112. A formal municipal tax lien had been filed that very morning. The county was preparing to initiate public auction proceedings. My parents were on the verge of losing the house they had lived in for 3 decades. The remaining $888 of his requested $15,000 was likely earmarked for Julian's offshore bookmaker to buy another week of breathing room. I stared at the red digits on my monitor. There was no arterial blockage. There was no surgical suite waiting on a wire transfer. They were not calling to save Susan's heart. They were calling to save their drywall. They had mortgaged their home to finance Julian's sports betting addiction, and now the consequences had arrived at their front door. They decided the easiest way to clear the delinquent tax debt was to extort the daughter they had already robbed. They thought the Italian espresso machine I sent meant I was a soft target, ready to be manipulated by a staged family crisis. "Dad," I interrupted his ongoing medical monologue, "I can help. But my corporate bank has strict fraud prevention protocols for large, immediate wire transfers. I need the exact medical billing codes from the clinic to authorize the release of funds." The line went dead quiet. The sound of his ragged breathing stopped instantly. "The what?" he asked, his voice losing its frantic edge. The current procedural terminology codes, I explained, smoothly tracing the edge of my laptop keyboard. The hospital administration uses them for every procedure. Just ask the billing department to fax or email me the itemized estimate containing those specific CPT markers. As soon as I verify the codes with my financial institution, the $15,000 is yours. David faltered. His entire strategy rested on my emotional compliance, not a request for federal health care documentation. He tried to pivot back to guilt, his preferred weapon. Your mother is lying in a hospital bed facing surgery, and you are treating this like a corporate spreadsheet. We do not have time for bureaucratic paperwork, Bella. The doctor is standing right here, waiting for the confirmation. Hand the phone to the doctor, then I replied. I can explain the banking requirements to him directly. The silence that followed was heavy with realization. David knew he was caught. He knew I saw through the facade. His performance crumbled, crumbling under the weight of his own lie. The terrified husband act vanished. The venom he usually reserved for telemarketers and customer service representatives returned, replacing the panic. You are just like those heartless corporate executives you work for, he spat. The words were laced with pure, unadulterated malice. You care more about numbers than your own flesh and blood. You are a cold, ungrateful algorithm of a person. We are your family, and you are abandoning us. I am just asking for a receipt, Dad, I said. Send the codes. I disconnected the call. I did not say goodbye. I did not offer any parting words of sympathy. I sat in my kitchen listening to the wind outside. The final, microscopic trace of empathy I held for my parents evaporated into the chill air, leaving behind a pristine, sterile clarity. Algorithm of a person. He intended it as a brutal insult, but I received it as a compliment. An algorithm is flawless. An algorithm seeks the correct output based entirely on the provided inputs. The input was their ongoing fraud and their willingness to invent a life-threatening illness to steal from me a second time. The output would be their financial destruction. The realization that they would sink to such depraved depths to cover Julian's collapse was profoundly liberating. They were no longer misguided parents trying to help a struggling son. They were active predators operating without a moral compass. I closed my laptop. Julian was drowning, and his flailing was dragging David and Susan beneath the surface. They could not secure a standard bank loan because their credit profiles were ruined by the commercial debt Julian had defaulted on. They could not borrow from friends because their country club's social circle required the illusion of flawless prosperity. They had nowhere left to turn. I went to sleep that night with a clear head, knowing the snare was tightening around their necks. The next morning, the harsh Minnesota sun reflected off the snowbanks outside my apartment complex. I stopped by the lobby mailroom before heading to the logistics firm. My metal compartment was mostly filled with standard grocery circulars and utility bills. But resting at the bottom of the stack was a thick piece of mail that did not belong. It was a sparkling, cream-colored envelope. The paper was heavy and expensive textured with a subtle pearl finish. The return address, printed in an elegant, sweeping font, belonged to Jessica. I turned the envelope over in my hands. Jessica lived in a bubble of generational wealth, insulated from the desperate tax liens and fake medical emergencies consuming her future in-laws. She had no idea her fiancé was a gambling addict or that his parents were days away from losing their home. She only knew the polished, successful version of Julian that my grandmother's money had purchased. I slid my fingernail under the wax seal and opened the flap. The contents inside would elevate my forensic investigation from a private family dispute into a high-stakes corporate conflict. The game was about to enter a new arena, bringing an entirely different player to the table. I ran my thumb beneath the heavy crimson wax seal of the cream-colored envelope. The textured paper gave way, revealing a rigid piece of expensive cardstock. Elegant gold foil lettering looped across the top, asking me to stand by her side. Jessica wanted me as a bridesmaid. We had spoken perhaps 3 times in the 4 years since my brother stole my future. Jessica did not invite me out of sisterly affection or a sudden desire for familial bonding. She invited me for visual symmetry. Her father, Thomas, was financing a lavish country club wedding meant to be photographed and featured in local society magazines. An inexplicably absent sister of the groom, would raise unwanted questions among their elite social circle. A unified, smiling bridal party looks much better in glossy spreads. I was merely a prop, required to complete the aesthetic of a flawless family merger. Before I could place the card down, my phone vibrated on the kitchen counter. The caller identification displayed Jessica's name. She was following up on the mail delivery. I cleared my throat, deliberately adjusting my vocal register. I summoned the sweet, compliant persona I had established weeks earlier with the Italian espresso machine. "Jessica," I answered. "The invitation is beautiful." A dramatic breath of relief filtered through the receiver. "Oh, I am so glad it arrived, Bella. Julian said you have been working so hard at your new corporate firm. We really want you up there with us at the altar. It means the world to him to have his little sister involved." "I would not miss it for anything," I replied. The conversation quickly shifted into a monologue regarding floral arrangements and table linens. Jessica spoke in the rapid, breathless cadence of a woman whose only current hardship was choosing between shades of ivory and eggshell. I let her talk, offering polite agreements while I wiped down my marble countertops. Then she pivoted to their future plans, and the entire landscape of my investigation shifted. "You know Julian has been so stressed with his tech company lately, but he still manages to spoil me," she said, her voice thick with pride. "He just surprised me yesterday. He put down the escrow deposit for our custom build." I stopped wiping the counter. My hand hovered over the stone surface. "A custom build," I asked, keeping my tone light. "Where are you looking to buy?" "Edina," she squealed. Edina was the premier wealth enclave of the metropolitan area. The property taxes alone required a formidable income. Purchasing a custom build in that zip code was a multi-million-dollar endeavor. "It is going to be stunning," Jessica continued, oblivious to the silence on my end. "But the construction delays are a nightmare, and do not even get me started on the interior finishes. Julian promised me imported Italian Calicotta marble for the kitchen island, but the supplier marked up the invoice by 20%. Can you believe that?" I could believe it. I also knew Julian did not have the liquidity to purchase a sheet of plywood, let alone imported stone. "That sounds incredibly stressful, Jessica. Building a home is a huge undertaking. Who is managing the development for you?" "Oh, my father's firm is handling the primary contracting," she answered casually. "Daddy wanted to keep the project in-house to ensure the quality was perfect for us. He gave Julianne a great deal on the land parcel." The pieces clicked into place with the terrifying precision of a loaded firearm. Julian was not just buying a house. He was purchasing a hostage. "That makes perfect sense," I said, smoothing out the edge of the gold foil cardstock. "I am honored to be your bridesmaid, Jessica. I will bring a very special gift for Julian on the big day." We disconnected. I walked straight to my laptop and opened my forensic auditing software. I bypassed the standard municipal searches and accessed the commercial real estate databases. I pulled the current development projects registered under Thomas and his corporate entities. I located the specific luxury residential subdivision in Edina. I drilled down into the individual parcel records until I found the escrow receipt Jessica mentioned. The deposit had been wired 3 days ago. The amount was substantial. Julian had likely squeezed the last drops of credit from a predatory hard money lender, or diverted a temporary winning streak from his offshore sports books just to secure the contract. I stared at the digital escrow ledger, recognizing the sheer, breathtaking audacity of my brother's fraud. He was executing a classic corporate infection. By intertwining his non-existent finances with Thomas and his real estate firm, Julian was attempting to build a firewall made of his future in-law's capital. Once the marriage certificate was signed, Julian officially became family. When his fake tech startup inevitably imploded and the offshore syndicates came to collect, Thomas would be forced to bail him out. Thomas would have to cover the gambling debts to protect Jessica from bankruptcy, and to shield his own firm from the fallout of the defaulted Edina contract. Julian was using Thomas's own daughter as a Trojan horse to access a legitimate real estate empire. Thomas was known throughout the city as a ruthless operator. He crushed competitors in zoning disputes. He audited his suppliers with zero mercy. But he failed to audit the man sleeping next to his daughter. The blind spot of paternal love allowed a parasite to walk right through his front door unchecked. Julian assumed the wealthy developer would simply write a check to make the scandal disappear once the trap was sprung. I clicked the print icon. The machine hummed and delivered the warm pages of the escrow transfer. I punched 3 holes along the edge and secured the document into the black binder. The binder now contained the complete anatomy of a sophisticated financial crime. The original stolen uniform transfers to Minors Act funds, the fake tech subsidiary shells, the offshore sports betting wire transfers, the delinquent property tax liens on my parents' house. And now the fraudulent real estate escrow contract dragging a local millionaire into the blast radius. The wedding was exactly 3 weeks away. The clock had started ticking down to 0. During those 3 weeks, I played my part flawlessly. I attended the mandatory bridal dress fitting at a boutique downtown. I stood on a circular pedestal while a tailor pinned the hem of a $400 sage green chiffon gown. I paid for the dress myself, sliding my corporate credit card across the glass counter. Jessica clapped her hands and told me how wonderful it was to have our families blending together seamlessly. Susan was there, too. My mother sat on a plush velvet sofa sipping complimentary champagne. She smiled at me in the mirror as if the fake medical emergency phone call had never happened. She complimented the color of my dress and adjusted her pearl necklace. The ability to compartmentalize is the hallmark of a skilled auditor. You separate the emotion from the data. Susan saw a compliant, dutiful daughter standing in front of a mirror, supporting her older brother. I saw a woman who was 30 days away from a foreclosure eviction notice. I smiled back at her. The fitting concluded with hugs and empty promises to catch up soon. I walked out of the boutique and merged into the busy downtown foot traffic. Time compressed. The days vanished into a streamlined sequence of logistical preparations. I finalized the internal whistleblower documentation for the commercial bank. I organized the printed evidence with color-coded tabs. I calculated the final accrued interest on my stolen tuition down to the very morning of the ceremony. The stage was set. The invitations were answered. The country club awaited our arrival. I packed my overnight bag and carefully placed the heavy black binder into the trunk of my car. I was driving into the Lion's Den for the rehearsal dinner. It was time to look my brother in the eye and let him boast about his success one last time. The winding driveway of the elite country club was lined with imported oak trees and manicured hedges that looked unnaturally green in the fading evening light. I pulled my rusted sedan up to the valet stand, sandwiched between a line of imported German luxury vehicles and pristine domestic SUVs. The valet attendant offered a tight, practiced smile, attempting to mask his disdain for my vehicle. I handed in the keys and walked through the heavy mahogany doors of the clubhouse. The rehearsal dinner was being held in the grand ballroom overlooking the 18th hole of the championship golf course. The room dripped in an aggressive display of wealth. Massive floral centerpieces choked the air with the heavy scent of lilies and orchids. A towering pyramid of champagne flutes commanded the center of the room, catching the light from the crystal chandeliers overhead. Servers in crisp white jackets circulated silently, carrying silver trays of caviar and seared tuna. This was not a dinner party. It was a financial exhibition orchestrated by Thomas to display his power and secure his daughter's social standing. I navigated the crowded room, locating my parents near a corner bar. The visual contrast was stark. David and Susan Thompson always projected an air of country club authority in their own suburban circles. But here, among the actual metropolitan elite, they looked remarkably fragile. David wore a tuxedo that appeared slightly dated and tight across his shoulders. Susan clutched a beaded evening bag with white-knuckled tension. Her posture was rigid. They looked like tourists who realized they had accidentally wandered onto a restricted military base. They were acutely aware that they did not belong and terrified that someone would ask them about their delinquent property tax liens. I approached them, offering a polite, empty greeting. "You both look lovely," I said, keeping my voice smooth and untroubled. David offered a stiff nod. "Glad you made the drive, Bella." He glanced nervously at a group of Thomas business associates laughing loudly nearby. "Your brother is circulating. He has a lot of important hands to shake tonight." I located Julian near the head table. He was wearing a custom-tailored charcoal suit, holding a tumbler of dark liquor. He was speaking animatedly to a group of older men, gesturing wildly with his free hand. But beneath the confident facade, the physical markers of panic were undeniable. A sheen of perspiration coated his forehead, reflecting the harsh chandelier light. His eyes darted constantly toward the entrance, and he repeatedly checked his vibrating smartphone, sliding it into his pocket and pulling it right back out. He was likely dodging angry text messages from offshore bookmakers, demanding wire transfers he could not provide. We took our seats for dinner. I was placed at a table near the front, populated primarily by Jessica's extended family and a few of Thomas' senior corporate partners. The meal progressed through 4 courses of rich, heavy food. I ate methodically, absorbing the conversation around me. The men discussed municipal zoning laws, commercial real estate yields, and aggressive corporate acquisitions. They spoke the language of predators. They vetted everything and everyone, yet they were entirely oblivious to the parasites sitting at the head table. As the dessert plates were cleared, the formal toasts began. A designated groomsman delivered a predictable speech about loyalty and brotherhood. Then Julian stood up. He buttoned his charcoal jacket and tapped the microphone. He waited for the room to quiet down, projecting the image of a seasoned chief executive addressing his shareholders. "I want to thank Thomas and Eleanor for welcoming me into their incredible family." Julian began, his voice echoing through the ballroom speakers. Building a tech startup from the ground up requires relentless focus. It requires sacrificing sleep, missing holidays, and putting everything on the line. He paused for dramatic effect. But looking at Jessica tonight, I know the hustle was worth it. My company is thriving because I demand transparency and spotless accounting in my business. I promise to bring that same integrity to this marriage. We are building a legacy together. He raised his glass. The room erupted in polite applause. I sat back in my chair and took a slow, deliberate sip of my red wine. The dramatic irony was so potent, it felt tangible. Spotless accounting, integrity. He used those words while standing less than 50 yards away from my vehicle. Locked inside the trunk of my car rested a thick black binder containing his falsified tax returns, his offshore gambling wire transfers, and the public records detailing his active embezzlement. He was lecturing a room full of millionaires about financial transparency while drowning in hundreds of thousands of dollars of illegal debt. The applause faded. The silence lingered, demanding another speaker. I looked down at the table setting. Resting next to my empty dessert plate was a heavy, sterling silver fork. I picked it up. The metal felt cool and substantial in my grip. I remembered the cheap styrofoam cup and the cracked plastic fork I had used to eat ramen noodles in my freezing apartment 4 years earlier while viewing his newly purchased Tesla online. The upgrade was not just material. It was a physical manifestation of my acquired power. I raised my arm. I tapped the edge of the sterling silver fork against the rim of my crystal water goblet. The clear, high-pitched ringing cut through the low hum of conversation. The room turned to look at me. I stood up, smoothing the front of my dress. I kept my toast brief. I spoke about the importance of deep foundations and recognizing the hidden truths that make a partnership strong. I offered a warm congratulations to the bride. I sat down to polite murmurs and scattered applause. I had successfully maintained the facade of the supportive sister. But more importantly, I had caught the attention of the man who mattered most. Following the speeches, the formal seating arrangement dissolved as guests mingled near the open bar. I positioned myself strategically near the terrace doors, nursing a glass of sparkling water. Within 10 minutes, Thomas approached me, holding a snifter of scotch. He was a tall, imposing man with silver hair and an assessing gaze. He moved with the casual authority of someone who rarely hears the word no. "Bella, isn't it?" Thomas asked, extending his hand. "Julian's sister." "Yes, sir, it is a beautiful event you hosted tonight," I replied, shaking his hand firmly. The grip was a test, and I did not yield. "Jessica mentioned you did not follow your brother into the technology sector," Thomas said, leaning against the high-top table. "She said you worked downtown, finance." "Forensic accounting, actually," I clarified, watching his eyebrows raise in genuine interest. "I'm an auditor for a corporate logistics firm. I specialize in identifying structural fraud, tracing obfuscated assets, and uncovering illicit financial structures." Thomas chuckled, taking a slow sip of his scotch. "A fraud auditor. That is a dangerous profession for a young woman. You must spend your days looking for the worst in people." "I spend my days looking for the truth," I countered, keeping my gaze deadpan and unwavering. "The numbers never lie, Thomas. People lie. The ledgers always tell the story if you know where to look. You would be surprised what people manage to hide in plain sight when they think nobody is paying attention." Thomas laughed loudly, a deep, booming sound that echoed off the glass terrace doors. "That is exactly the kind of cynical perspective my real estate development firm needs. We are expanding our commercial portfolio next quarter. We could use someone with your sharp eye looking over Julian's books. Make sure the kid is actually turning a profit before he builds that massive house in Edina." I did not break eye contact. I offered a slow, measured smile. "I would love to look over his books, Thomas," I replied, my voice dropping an octave. "Consider it done." Out of the corner of my eye, I saw movement. Julian had been walking toward the bar to order another drink. He froze mid-step. He had overheard the exchange. The color drained from his face, leaving a sickly gray pallor under the chandeliers. He stared at me, the glass in his hand trembling slightly. He knew exactly what a forensic auditor did, and for the first time in 4 years, he realized the quiet sister he had discarded was not a victim. She was an apex predator, currently standing 3 feet away from his wealthy future father-in-law, discussing his corporate ledgers. Julian turned and walked quickly toward the restroom, avoiding my gaze entirely. The panic had finally pierced his narcissistic armor. He realized he was no longer in control of the narrative. I excused myself from the conversation with Thomas, wishing him a wonderful evening. I walked out of the grand ballroom and retrieved my keys from the valet. I did not need to stay for the remaining festivities. The bait had been consumed. The snare was locked. I drove back to my hotel room a few miles away from the country club. I opened the trunk of my car and pulled out the heavy black binder. I laid it on the desk in my room, verifying the contents one final time. I set my alarm for early the next morning. The rehearsal was over. The actual execution was scheduled for dawn. The alarm clock on my hotel nightstand did not wake me. I had been sitting in the dark for an hour watching the Minneapolis skyline emerge from the shadows of dawn. The digital red numbers shifted to 6 in the morning. I stood up and walked to the closet. I unzipped the protective garment bag and pulled out the sage green chiffon bridesmaid dress. I slipped the fabric over my head, smoothing out the seams. I fastened the hidden zipper along my ribs. I stepped into a pair of beige heels. I walked into the bathroom and stared at my reflection under the harsh vanity lights. I did not see a supportive sister preparing to celebrate a family milestone. I saw a corporate auditor ready to execute a hostile liquidation. I returned to the bedroom and picked up the thick black binder from the desk. It weighed a formidable 5 pounds. It contained the exact blueprint of 4 years of financial deception. I held it against my side, feeling the sharp edges of the plastic cover press into my hip. I exited my room and walked toward the elevators. The hotel corridors were silent, padded with thick, geometric patterned carpet that absorbed the sound of my footsteps. I pressed the button for the 12th floor. The elevator hummed a low mechanical tune as it ascended. The doors parted, revealing the penthouse level. I navigated the quiet passageway until I reached the heavy oak door of the primary preparation suite. According to the meticulous schedule Jessica had emailed weeks prior, Julian and my parents were occupying this specific room to take private family portraits before the chaotic bridal party activities commenced. I raised my free hand and knocked twice on the polished wood. The door swung open. David stood in the threshold wearing a crisp black tuxedo. His silver hair was perfectly combed. A white boutonniere rested on his left lapel. He offered a tight, surprised smile. "Bella, you are early." "The photographer does not need the groom's side of the family for another hour." I did not return the smile. I stepped forward, forcing him to step back into the room to avoid a collision. I crossed the threshold and scanned the luxury suite. The space was enormous, featuring a vaulted ceiling, floor-to-ceiling windows, and a sprawling velvet seating area. Susan was standing near the window, adjusting the clasp of a diamond bracelet. She wore a tailored navy blue evening gown. Julian was sitting on the edge of a leather armchair. He held a crystal tumbler filled with amber liquid. He was drinking hard liquor at 7 in the morning. The panic from our brief encounter with Thomas the night before had clearly followed him into the daylight. I turned around and faced the heavy oak door. I reached out and engaged the brass deadbolt. The lock slid into place with a loud metallic click. The sound echoed through the quiet room, snapping their attention toward me. David frowned, his brow furrowing in confusion. "What are you doing locking the door? The photographer is on his way up." I turned my back to the door and walked directly to the center of the room. A large tempered glass coffee table sat between the velvet sofas. I raised my arm and dropped the 5-pound black binder onto the glass surface. The impact produced a sharp cracking noise that made Susan jump. "Before the vows begin, we need to settle an outstanding account," I said. My voice was calm, measured, and devoid of any emotional fluctuation. Julian lowered his tumbler. His eyes darted from my face to the binder and back again. David took a step forward, his posture stiffening. "What kind of nonsense are you pulling, Bella? This is your brother's wedding day. We do not have time for your theatrics." I reached into the front pocket of the binder. I extracted a single, crisp sheet of white paper. It was a formal, corporate invoice printed on heavy stock. I slid the paper across the smooth glass table, pushing it until it rested directly in front of Julian. "Read it," I commanded. Julian leaned forward. He stared at the typed lines. I did not wait for him to speak. I recited the contents from memory, ensuring every syllable carried the weight of a judge reading a verdict. "Line item 1, I began. The stolen principal from my Uniform Transfers to Minors Act Educational Trust, $68,000, withdrawn without authorization by the fiduciary custodian, David Thompson." Susan gasped. Her hand flew to her throat, resting against her collarbone. "Line item 2, I continued, ignoring her reaction. The exact 8% compound interest rate spanning 48 months. This mirrors the exact predatory interest rate of the private student loan I was forced to sign to replace the stolen capital." David turned a dark shade of crimson. The flush crept up his neck, staining his collar. "Shut your mouth," he hissed. Line item 3, I pushed forward, my tone dropping lower. "Fraudulent transfer penalties and calculated damages for deliberate financial sabotage. The invoice total is $112,400. I looked directly into Julian's eyes. The bravado he had displayed at the rehearsal dinner was entirely gone. Payable immediately, I said. A tense, suffocating silence descended upon the suite. The only sound was the distant hum of the hotel air conditioning system. Julian looked down at the invoice. He attempted to deploy his usual defense mechanism. He let out a nervous, hollow laugh. The sound was brittle and unconvincing. "Is this a joke, Bella?" he asked, his voice cracking on the final syllable. "You come in here on the morning of my wedding with a fake bill? Are you really this jealous of me? You need to leave." David stepped around the glass table, closing the distance between us. His fists were clenched at his sides. The veins in his temples throbbed visible under the harsh morning light. "You ungrateful brat," he snarled, pointing a trembling finger at my face. "We gave you everything. We raised you. You walk into this room and try to extort your own family. Pick up your garbage and get out of this suite before I have hotel security remove you." I did not flinch. I did not step back. I held his furious gaze and slowly reached out to tap the thick plastic cover of the black binder. "This is not a negotiation, Dad," I stated coolly. "Inside this binder are the verified bank routing numbers, proving Julian committed federal wire fraud. I have the receipts tracing the phantom corporate revenue directly to unregulated offshore sports betting platforms. He is not a tech founder. He is a gambling addict, drowning in illegal debt." Julian's tumbler slipped from his grip. It hit the carpeted floor with a dull thud, spilling brown liquid across the expensive rug. I turned my attention back to David. "And I have the public property deeds showing you quietly leveraged your home equity to underwrite his fraudulent commercial loans. I have the delinquent municipal tax liens proving you are weeks away from a foreclosure auction. You forged fiduciary documents to empty my trust, and you lied to cover his tracks." Susan collapsed onto the velvet sofa behind her. She buried her face in her hands, letting out a low, muffled sob. She knew the truth had finally breached their fortified walls. The illusion was dead. I checked the silver watch on my left wrist. It is currently 7:15 in the morning. I require a direct wire transfer of $112,400 into my corporate checking account by 8:15. You have 60 minutes to secure the funds. Julian stared at me, his mouth opening and closing like a suffocating fish. "I do not have that kind of liquidity, Bella. You know I do not. All my capital is tied up in the Edina real estate escrow." I offered a slow, clinical smile. "Then you better ask your wealthy future father-in-law for a bridge loan, Julian. Because if that money does not hit my ledger in exactly 60 minutes, I am going to unlock this door, walk down the hallway to Thomas' private suite, and hand him a duplicate copy of this entire forensic report." The color drained entirely from Julian's face, leaving him a sickly, pale gray. Thomas would not just cancel the wedding if he saw those documents. He would deploy his corporate attorneys to bury Julian in civil litigation for attempting to infect his real estate firm with fraudulent capital. Thomas would ruin him. "The countdown has started," I said, stepping away from the glass table. I walked to the velvet armchair opposite Susan and sat down, crossing my legs. I folded my hands in my lap, waiting. David and Julianne stood frozen in the center of the room, paralyzed by the inescapable reality of their situation. The trap had snapped shut, breaking their bones. Julianne pulled his smartphone from his suit pocket. His hands shook so severely, he dropped the device twice before successfully unlocking the screen. He began scrolling frantically through his contacts, searching for a miracle that did not exist. He could not call Thomas. He could not call his bookies. He had exhausted every single lifeline. The 60-minute timer was merciless. But what they did not know was that the invoice was merely the opening salvo. The true, devastating blow was already moving through the institutional banking channels, triggered by a sequence I had initiated 24 hours earlier. The federal machinery was awake, and it was coming for all of them. The luxury suite, felt as though the oxygen had been drained through the air vents. Julian stood in the center of the room, staring at his smartphone screen. His thumbs moved in rapid, erratic swipes across the glass surface. He opened text threads and immediately closed them. He navigated to banking applications, attempting to refresh balances that offered no salvation. The digital network he relied upon to sustain his wealthy facade was entirely empty. The 60-minute deadline hung over his head like an invisible weighted pendulum. He wore a custom-tailored suit designed to project command and authority, but inside that expensive wool shell, he was nothing more than a cornered animal, realizing the perimeter fence was electrified. The silence stretched, pulling the tension tighter with every passing second. Then, the psychological pressure fractured his remaining composure. Julian let out a guttural sound that was half frustration and half pure panic. He dropped his phone onto the carpet, his eyes locked onto the black binder resting on the tempered glass table. In his desperate mind, eliminating the physical object equated to eliminating the threat. He lunged across the seating area. His polished leather dress shoes slipped slightly on the rug, but he caught his balance grabbing the thick plastic cover of the forensic portfolio. He clutched it to his chest, his knuckles turning white, ready to tear the pages into unrecognizable shreds. I did not flinch. I simply took one smooth step backward, creating distance between myself and his erratic movement. "That is a copy," I stated. My voice remained remarkably even, betraying zero alarm. Julian froze. His hands hovered over the metal rings inside the binder. "The original documents are locked inside a safety deposit box at a downtown depository," I explained, watching the color drain further from his cheeks. "Along with a sworn notarized affidavit and a digital flash drive containing the raw metadata. Tearing up those pages will only leave you with a mess on the floor, Julian. It will not erase the math." He stared at the binder in his hands, realizing the physical object was just a symptom of a disease he could not cure. The true danger lived in servers and legal vaults far beyond his reach. The portfolio slipped from his grip, landing back on the table with a dull thud. He backed away, rubbing his face with trembling palms. Susan could no longer maintain her silent weeping. She pulled her hands away from her face, revealing streaked mascara and red-rimmed eyes. She looked up at me from the velvet sofa, her pristine navy evening gown wrinkling around her waist. "Bella, please," she begged. Her voice was thin, reedy, and stripped of all its usual country club pretension. "We do not have the money. We cannot wire you $112,000. I kept my gaze fixed on her, waiting for the inevitable admission. "The credit cards are maxed out," Susan continued, the words tumbling from her mouth in a breathless rush. "We drained the emergency savings last week, just to cover the floral deposits for this reception. Your father tried to borrow against his life insurance policy, but the underwriter denied the request because of our debt-to-income ratio. We have nothing left to give you." Julian turned his head slowly. He looked at his mother as if she had just spoken a foreign language. The horror etched into his features was profound. He had spent the last 2 years assuming his parents possessed a bottomless reserve of hidden capital. He believed that no matter how deep his offshore sports betting losses ran, David and Susan would always find a way to patch the hull. He had never considered that the ship was already resting on the ocean floor. "What do you mean you have nothing left?" Julian asked, his voice barely a whisper. "What about the secondary brokerage account? Dad said we had a cushion." David closed his eyes, unable to look his son in the face. Susan shook her head, her shoulders trembling. "It is gone, Julian. Every cent is gone. We used the last of it to keep the commercial loan officers away from the house, but then the property taxes came due. We are ruined." The conspirators had finally unmasked themselves to one another. Julian did not know the fatal extent of his parents' ruin, and they did not know the catastrophic depth of his current illegal debts. They had all been lying to each other to maintain the illusion of control. The realization that they were mutually bankrupt settled over the room, suffocating their last remnants of hope. I checked the silver watch on my left wrist. 45 minutes remained before the ceremony was scheduled to begin. The guests were likely arriving in the lobby downstairs, taking their seats in the designated rows, blissfully unaware of the financial slaughter occurring on the penthouse level. "It gets worse," I said, breaking their shared realization. All three of them turned their attention back to me. They looked exhausted, beaten down by a truth they had spent 4 years trying to outrun. Yesterday afternoon, I continued taking a slow, steady breath. I utilized my official corporate auditor credentials. I compiled a preliminary summary of Julian's business activities, and I submitted a formal tip to the compliance division of the commercial bank that issued your $250,000 small business loan. David opened his eyes. The whites were shot with red veins. A formal tip, he repeated, tasting the words as if they were poison. I flagged a severe breach of loan covenants. I explained maintaining clinical eye contact. More importantly, I flagged the outgoing international wire transfers as clear violations of federal anti-money laundering statutes. Julian gripped the back of the leather armchair. He understood the terminology. He knew exactly what a federal banking flag entailed. Institutional banks do not operate on empathy, I told them, detailing the mechanics of the snare. They operate on risk mitigation algorithms. When a credentialed forensic accountant submits documented evidence of offshore money laundering, the bank does not wait for a court order. They initiate an automated defense protocol. The software sweeps the primary account and identifies every linked routing number. Within 24 hours, a hard freeze is placed on all associated assets to prevent capital flight. Susan let out a sharp, terrified gasp. A freeze. Yes, Mom. A freeze. No withdrawals, no outbound transfers, no debit card authorizations. Every checking and savings account carrying your name or Julian's name is currently being locked by an automated security grid. The capital is inaccessible stone. Even if Thomas walked into this room right now and handed you a personal check for $1 million, you would have no functioning bank account to deposit it into. The federal machinery is already moving. Susan collapsed sideways onto the velvet cushions. She buried her face into the upholstery, weeping hysterically. The sound was raw and primal. It was the sound of a woman realizing her grocery money, her utility payments, and her entire pristine suburban existence had been permanently erased by a line of digital code. She was effectively a ghost in the financial system. David stood near the window, his arms hanging limply at his sides. The anger that had fueled him moments ago was entirely spent. He looked at me, not with fury, but with a terrifying, hollow dread. He saw the daughter he had dismissed as a weak collateral casualty standing before him as an architect of total destruction. "You would destroy your own family over money?" he whispered. The accusation hung in the quiet air, attempting to find a moral foothold. I studied his face. I searched my own chest for a flicker of regret or a shadow of guilt. I found nothing. The space where my familial loyalty used to reside had been cauterized 4 years ago on a freezing campus sidewalk. They defined family as a system where my future was offered as a blood sacrifice to feed my brother's ego. I defined family as a reciprocal bond of trust. They broke the contract first. I was merely enforcing the penalty clause. "You did," I replied, my voice dropping to a cool, unyielding register. "I am just balancing the ledger." The grandfather clock in the corner of the suite ticked, marking the passage of time. 30 minutes remained. Julian released his grip on the armchair. The manic energy of a cornered addict returned, flooding his system. He dropped to his knees on the carpet and scrambled to retrieve his discarded smartphone. He unlocked the screen, his fingers flying across the digital keypad. He began searching for hard money lenders, online payday loan portals, and predatory short-term credit lines. He was desperately attempting to secure a six-figure cash injection with less than half an hour left on the clock. It was a futile, pathetic display. No institution on earth would wire that amount of capital to an unemployed gambler moments before his wedding. I remained standing near the glass table watching him swipe at his glowing screen. The illusion was dead. The bank accounts were frozen. The parents were broken. But the final element of the trap still required execution. The man paying for the orchids downstairs was waiting for his future son-in-law to walk down the aisle. The truth had conquered the penthouse suite, but it needed to travel down the hallway to Thomas. The 60-minute timer was nearing its end, and the bride was currently putting on her veil. The digital clock on the bedside table shifted to 8:15. The 60 minutes had expired. Julian was still swiping at the glass surface of his smartphone. A red error notification flashed across the screen indicating a network timeout or a final rejection from whatever predatory lending application he was trying to access. His thumb hovered over the display, trembling so hard he could not register another keystroke. He dropped the device. It landed on the thick hotel rug without a sound. He had failed. The reality of zero capital finally crushed the last delusion he harbored. I stood up. The velvet cushions released the fabric of my dress. I walked toward the tempered glass coffee table. I reached down and picked up the black binder. The plastic cover felt cold against my skin. It carried the weight of a loaded weapon. Julian let out a ragged breath. "Please, Bella," he whispered. His voice was a pathetic hiss. "I will do anything. I will sign a legal confession. I will transfer ownership of the car. Just do not show him that portfolio. Give me another day to fix this." I ignored the plea. A forensic auditor does not grant extensions to a fleeing embezzler. I walked to the heavy oak door. I wrapped my hand around the brass deadbolt and turned it. The mechanism disengaged with a loud, echoing snap. I pulled the handle and stepped out of the luxury suite into the penthouse corridor. The hallway was wide and bathed in soft morning light filtering through the floor-to-ceiling windows at the far end. The geometric patterned carpet absorbed the sound of my heels. Julian scrambled out of the suite, trailing inches behind me. He was crying now. Real tears streamed down his face, ruining his pristine aesthetic. The carefully cultivated image of the stoic tech founder dissolved into the pathetic reality of a terrified addict. He reached out, grabbing the air near my shoulder, but pulled his hand back, afraid of causing a physical altercation in the open corridor. We rounded the corner near the primary elevator bank. Thomas was standing near a marble console table. He wore a flawless, tailored tuxedo, looking every inch the corporate patriarch holding court. He was speaking in low tones with a man holding a thick clipboard, likely the head wedding coordinator, finalizing the reception timeline. Thomas looked up. He saw us approaching. His polite, welcoming smile faltered instantly. He possessed the sharp, predatory instincts of a man who built a real estate empire from the ground up. He recognized when an environment shifted. He noticed Julian's red-rimmed eyes, his sweat-stained collar, and his erratic breathing. Then his gaze shifted to me. I stood tall, untroubled, holding the thick forensic portfolio against my ribs. I closed the remaining distance, bypassing the confused wedding coordinator entirely. "Good morning, Thomas," I said. My voice carried the crisp, unwavering authority of a boardroom presentation. Thomas narrowed his eyes, studying my face. "Good morning, Bella," he replied cautiously. "Is there a problem with the bridal party? Last night at the rehearsal dinner, you asked me to look over Julian's books." I continued, keeping my tone clinical and detached. I held out the black binder. Thomas looked at the plastic cover. He reached out and took it from my hands. The weight of the pages settled into his grip. "Here is my official report," I stated, ensuring every syllable was perfectly articulated. "Julian is $400,000 in debt. He is currently pending a federal bank freeze for international money laundering. He utilized the escrow deposit on the Edina residential property to leverage your firm into covering his offshore gambling deficits. Julian let out a muffled, agonizing sob. He covered his face with both hands and leaned heavily against the textured wallpaper of the corridor, sliding down until his knees buckled. Thomas did not gasp. He did not shout. A man who controls millions in municipal assets does not waste his energy on theatrical outrage. He opens the evidence. Thomas lifted the plastic cover. He bypassed the typed summary page and flipped directly to the raw data. He turned to the bank routing numbers, the offshore wire transfer receipts, and the fraudulent subsidiary shell registrations. It took him exactly 30 seconds. 30 seconds for a financial veteran to trace the arithmetic of his own attempted ruin. I watched his eyes scan the ledgers. I saw the precise moment he recognized the Cayman Island holding companies. I witnessed the rigid tightening of his jaw when he realized his own daughter was nothing more than a human shield designed to protect a parasite from an illegal syndicate. Thomas closed the binder. The snap of the metal rings echoed like a gunshot in the quiet hall. His face transformed into a mask of pure, carved granite. All traces of the generous father of the bride vanished, replaced entirely by the ruthless chief executive. He looked down at Julianne. Julianne was weeping openly, crouching on the floor inside his expensive charcoal jacket. Thomas did not offer a single word of reprimand. He reached into his inner breast pocket and retrieved his smartphone. He pressed a single speed dial contact and raised the device to his ear. "Cancel the caterers," Thomas ordered. His voice was a low, dangerous rumble that vibrated with contained fury. "Send the primary security detail to the penthouse level immediately. I want the groom's family escorted off the premises. Lock down the grand ballroom. The event is terminated." He ended the call and returned the phone to his pocket. The swift, lethal efficiency of his command was breathtaking. He dismantled a $1 million social event in 4 sentences. The door to the adjacent bridal suite clicked open. Jessica stepped into the hallway. She wore a stunning white silk gown. The bodice featured intricate beadwork that caught the morning sun. A long, sheer veil trailed behind her, dragging softly across the carpet. She held a bouquet of white orchids in her left hand. She stopped walking. The scene before her defied any logical explanation she might possess. Her fiancé was sobbing on the floor, clutching his knees. Her father looked like a corporate executioner holding a mysterious black folder. Her future sister-in-law stood nearby, radiating total detachment. "Daddy?" she asked, her voice trembling. "What is happening out here? Why is Julianne crying on the floor?" Thomas turned to his daughter. The rigid lines of his face softened just a fraction, but the iron resolve remained in his eyes. He held up the black binder. "The man is a fraud," Jessica Thomas said gently but firmly. "There is no tech company. There is no custom house in Edina. He has hundreds of thousands of dollars in debt to illegal syndicates, and he tried to use our capital to save himself. The wedding is off." Jessica blinked. The information struck her like a physical blow. She looked down at Julian, waiting for a denial. She waited for him to stand up and shout that it was a terrible misunderstanding or a clerical error. Julian could not look at her. He buried his head further between his knees. His silence served as a total, unconditional confession. The shock on Jessica's face mutated into a profound, chilling clarity. She did not scream. She did not collapse into hysterics or demand an explanation. She possessed her father's unyielding steel. She understood the mathematics of betrayal. She reached down with her right hand and grasped the left ring finger. She pulled the brilliant cut diamond over her knuckle. The stone caught the hallway light one final time. She threw the ring. It struck Julian's chest with a sharp thwack and bounced onto the patterned carpet, rolling away into the shadows near the baseboard. Jessica turned around and walked back into her suite. She closed the door with a definitive, echoing slam. The heavy footfalls of the private security team sounded from the nearby stairwell. 4 men in dark suits entered the corridor, moving with silent, synchronized purpose. 2 of them approached Julian, pulling him up from the floor by his arms. The other 2 moved toward the primary suite to extract David and Susan. The eviction was swift, professional, and utterly humiliating. They were dragged out of the luxury hotel like common trespassers. I watched the dismantling of my brother's life with a quiet, steady heart. The ledger was finally balanced. The debt of deception was paid in full. I turned toward the elevator bank, ready to leave the hotel and return to my own pristine existence. "Bella." The voice stopped me. I looked back over my shoulder. Thomas was standing near the console table, holding the black binder under his arm. The chaos of the security extraction unfolded behind him, but his focus was entirely on me. He studied my face, recognizing the lethal efficiency of the trap I had just triggered. He saw a peer. "Your logistics firm, Thomas," said his tone returning to the sharp cadence of a corporate predator. "You work downtown." "I do," I replied. "Call my private office on Monday morning," Thomas instructed. "I want to hire you on a freelance contract. I need a forensic auditor to dismantle his remaining limited liability companies and ensure none of his toxic assets stick to my corporate profile. I will pay double your standard billing rate." I offered a slow, measured nod. "I look forward to it, Thomas." I pressed the elevator call button. The polished metal doors slid open. I stepped inside the carriage and rode down to the lobby, leaving the wreckage of my former family far behind me. The ensuing Monday morning brought a crisp, clinical clarity to my existence. I sat in my downtown corner office, the expansive glass windows filtering the weak Minnesota sunlight across my desk. The weekend had been an execution, and the work week commenced with the cold, legal autopsy. My scheduled phone call with Thomas had been brief and highly productive. He executed the retainer agreement authorizing my firm to initiate a comprehensive forensic dismantling of Julian's remaining subsidiary shells. The mandate was simple: eradicate any trace of his fraudulent footprint near Thomas' real estate empire. While I drafted the legal compliance memorandums, the institutional fallout I had triggered earlier was executing its automated sequence across the city. As I predicted, the Commercial Bank Compliance Division received my formal whistleblower tip regarding the $250,000 small business loan. The inclusion of international routing numbers linked to offshore gaming syndicates forced their hand. Institutional banks cannot afford the regulatory penalties associated with turning a blind eye to potential money laundering operations. The algorithms took control, overriding any human leniency. Within 24 hours of the canceled wedding, the bank executed a comprehensive hard freeze on all accounts carrying the Thompson surname linked to the suspect ledgers. The joint checking account my parents shared with Julian, the primary savings accounts, and the operational accounts for the fake tech startups were locked. A digital padlock slammed shut over their entire financial reality. The capital was visible on a screen, but entirely inaccessible to the account holders. The freeze triggered a cascade of catastrophic defaults. The ecosystem Julian and my parents had constructed required constant liquidity to maintain the facade. The monthly payment for the secondary mortgage they took out against my childhood home was scheduled for an automatic draft on Tuesday. The draft failed. The bank managing their mortgage issued an immediate delinquency notice. With their primary assets locked under a federal AML investigation, David and Susan possessed no alternative reserves to cure the default. By Thursday afternoon, the mortgage lender initiated formal pre-foreclosure proceedings. The county property tax lien, which they had tried to pay using the fake medical emergency extortion plot, remained unsatisfied, compounding the daily penalties. The pressure mounting on my parents was total and inescapable. They were socially exiled by Thomas' security detail, financially frozen by federal regulations, and facing imminent eviction from their home of 3 decades. The golden son they had sacrificed my future for was currently avoiding process servers and hiding from angry offshore bookmakers. On Friday afternoon, my office phone rang. It was an incoming call from an unlisted, prepaid cellular number. I recognized the tactic immediately. I had blocked their primary cell phones the moment I left the hotel corridor. I stared at the flashing caller identification, allowing the ringtone to echo in the quiet office space. I reached out and lifted the receiver, bringing it to my ear. "Hello," I answered, my voice smooth and professional. "Bella." The voice belonged to David, but it lacked the sharp, aggressive resonance he usually wielded as a weapon. He sounded hollowed out, thin and brittle. He did not yell. He did not threaten me with estrangement or hurl insults about my corporate demeanor. He was entirely, fundamentally broken. "What can I do for you, Dad?" I asked, continuing to type a data entry string into my computer terminal. He let out a ragged breath. The silence stretched, indicating the sheer physical effort it took for him to speak the following words. "I went to the grocery store this morning," he whispered. "We are out of basic supplies. I tried to buy a carton of milk and some bread. The cashier ran my debit card. It declined in front of the entire line." I paused my typing. "I called the automated bank line from the parking lot," David continued, his voice cracking. "The system told me the account was locked pending review. But the worst part, Bella, the worst part was that the automated system processed the declined transaction against a hidden minimum balance requirement. They hit me with a penalty charge, a $34 overdraft fee. The number hung in the air, suspended between us over the cellular network. $34. A sudden, profound stillness settled into the center of my chest. 4 years ago, I sat in a freezing off-campus apartment staring at a red negative sign on a digital bank ledger. I had bounded across campus through 6 inches of snow because my checking account held a negative $34 overdraft fee incurred after purchasing a used statistics textbook. That fee represented the exact moment I realized my family had discarded me. It was the physical manifestation of my stolen tuition and my sudden, total isolation. Now, 4 years later, the exact same financial penalty had arrived to signify the end of David's empire. The symmetry was flawless. It was a perfect mathematical loop closing. "We have absolutely nothing left, Bella," he sobbed openly into the receiver, the sound wet and pathetic. "The house is going up for auction. The credit cards are shut off. Susan cannot stop crying in the living room. Julian will not answer our calls. You have to call the commercial bank. You have to withdraw the compliance report. Tell them it was a misunderstanding. Please, we cannot survive this." I leaned back in my ergonomic leather chair, looking out over the geometric city grid below. I listened to the man who told me he needed it more. I listened to the man who called me an ungrateful algorithm. I felt no pity. I felt the deep, satisfying resonance of poetic justice. "I cannot withdraw a federal anti-money laundering flag. Dad," I explained calmly, adjusting the microphone on my headset, "the report is logged into their central risk management system. The investigation is out of my hands. The math is already in motion." The despair on his end of the line was palpable. "What are we supposed to do?" he cried, the pitch of his voice rising in panic. "We are going to be homeless. How do we fix this?" I let the question linger, allowing him to feel the cold, empty void of his situation. I remembered the exact words he used when he informed me my Uniform Transfers to Minors Act trust was empty. I recalled the dismissive, arrogant cadence he deployed when he condemned me to a decade of predatory student debt. I retrieved that specific memory, and I served it back to him on a silver platter. "You are smart, Dad," I stated, my tone dropping into a cool, unyielding register. "Figure it out." I removed the headset and pressed the disconnect button, terminating the call. I accessed the internal communications directory on my corporate interface. I navigated to the Security tab and initiated a permanent global block on the prepaid cellular number, adding it to the comprehensive blacklist, securing my personal and professional lines. The severance was complete. The conversation represented the final verbal exchange I would ever have with David Thompson. I returned to the compliance memorandums on my monitor. The satisfying click of my keyboard filled the quiet office. My parents were drowning in the exact financial abyss they had dug for me. The irony of the $34 overdraft fee was a brilliant conclusion to their chapter of the story. But my ledger was not entirely balanced yet. The principal was reclaimed and the punishment was delivered. However, the ultimate payoff remained uncollected. The physical asset they had leveraged to support Julianne's gambling addiction was preparing to enter the open market. I had spent years pouring 60% of my income into destroying debt, preparing myself for an opportunity exactly like the one approaching. I possessed flawless credit, a substantial cash reserve, and a very specific target on the county auction block. 6 months dissolved into the meticulous rhythm of corporate litigation and asset recovery. I spent the autumn and winter executing the contract Thomas provided. I dismantled Julian's limited liability companies with surgical precision. I severed every fraudulent link separating Thomas' real estate empire from the toxic wreckage my brother left behind. During those months, Thomas and I developed a formidable professional rapport. He respected my unyielding methodology. I appreciated his cold financial pragmatism. We shared a mutual understanding that sentimentality has no place on a balance sheet. By early April, the pre-foreclosure proceedings against my parents culminated in a final judgment. The municipal tax authority and the commercial lender seized the property. The 4-bedroom suburban house where I grew up was scheduled for the county public auction block. I sat across from Thomas in his sprawling boardroom on a Tuesday afternoon. We were finalizing the dissolution of the last corporate entity. Thomas poured 2 glasses of sparkling water and slid a manila folder across the mahogany table. I heard the residential parcel in the suburbs is hitting the auction block on Friday, Thomas said, his tone casual, but his eyes sharp. The opening bid is a fraction of the market value. The bank just wants to clear the defaulted paper from their books. I looked at the folder. It contained the county auction listing. I have the capital to bid, I replied, but engaging in a bidding war against local property flippers requires a liquid threshold I prefer not to lock up entirely. Thomas leaned back in his leather chair. You saved my daughter from marrying a parasite Bella. You saved my firm from an entanglement that would have cost me millions in legal damage control. Consider this a joint venture. I will back your anonymous holding company with my capital reserves. You bid on the house. You win the auction. We flip the property in the spring market and divide the net revenue. It was a calculated, predatory real estate maneuver. It was also the ultimate execution of my vengeance. I accepted his terms without hesitation. On Friday morning, I stood on the concrete steps of the county courthouse. The Minnesota spring air was crisp. I wore a tailored trench coat, standing among a crowd of seasoned local contractors and property investors. The auctioneer read the parcel identification number through a handheld megaphone. I did not bid under my own name. I operated through a newly formed corporate entity, shielding my identity behind layers of legal paperwork. The bidding started low. A few contractors raised their numbered placards. I waited until the pace slowed. Then I raised my card. I utilized Thomas Capital to outmaneuver every competing offer. The auctioneer called out the final warning. The gavel struck the wooden podium. I purchased my childhood home for pennies on the dollar. The bank cleared their bad debt, and I acquired the physical asset my parents had traded for my brother's gambling addiction. The legal transfer of the deed required 30 days to finalize. During that window, David and Susan remained in the house living as squatters, under the assumption that a faceless banking institution owned the property. They anticipated a standard bureaucratic eviction process, hoping to stall the system for months. They did not know the new landlord was intimately familiar with their timeline. On a Tuesday afternoon, exactly 30 days after the courthouse event, I parked my vehicle at the end of their familiar suburban street. I stepped out of the car holding a sealed manila envelope. I walked up the concrete driveway. The lawn was overgrown. The flower beds Susan used to meticulously maintain were choked with weeds. The physical decay of the property mirrored the financial ruin of its occupants. I climbed the front porch steps and knocked on the door. The deadbolt clicked. Susan opened the door. She wore a faded robe holding a damp cleaning rag. The sight of me, standing on her porch, sent a visible tremor through her frame. She looked behind me, expecting a police escort or a process server. "Bella," she whispered, her voice carrying a fragile, desperate hope. "Did you come to help us?" I did not offer a greeting. I held out the manila envelope. "This is a formal 30-day notice to vacate the premises," I stated, ensuring my vocal delivery was devoid of any familial warmth. Susan stared at the envelope, but did not reach for it. David appeared in the hallway behind her. He looked thinner. His posture stooped under the crushing weight of his failures. He saw me, and his eyes narrowed. "We are dealing with the bank," David said, stepping forward to shield his wife. "We do not need you coming here to gloat. The bank owns the house now. We are negotiating a grace period." I let the envelope drop. It landed on the welcome mat between us. "The commercial lender no longer owns this parcel, Dad," I explained, watching their expressions shift from defiance to confusion. "The property was liquidated at the public auction last month. A private holding company acquired the deed. I am the primary managing director of that holding company." The information processed slowly in their minds. I watched the cognitive gears grind until the devastating reality took hold. "You bought the house." Susan breathed, her hands shaking as she pulled the robe tighter around her chest. "I am your new landlord," I confirmed, "and I am terminating your occupancy. You have 30 days to pack your belongings and vacate the premises. If you remain inside the structure on day 31, I will deploy the county sheriff to forcibly remove you for trespassing." David stared at me. The final embers of his patriarchal authority extinguished, leaving behind nothing but cold, gray ash. The daughter he told to figure it out had returned to serve him an eviction notice on his own front porch. He had no leverage. He had no counter-argument. He simply closed his eyes, accepting the flawless symmetry of his punishment. I turned around and walked down the driveway. I did not look back. I got into my car and drove back to the city. They vacated the property on day 28. They left the keys on the kitchen counter. I hired a contracting crew to execute a rapid cosmetic renovation. We painted the walls, polished the hardwood floors, and updated the landscaping. The suburban real estate market was experiencing a profound surge in demand that spring. I listed the house for sale. The property spent less than a week on the market before instigating a bidding war among prospective buyers. We closed the sale 3 months later at a premium price point well above the initial appraisal value. I sat in Thomas' boardroom signing the final distribution checks. We divided the extraordinary profits evenly according to our joint venture agreement. I deposited my share into my corporate banking portal. I opened a second tab navigating to my private student loan servicer. I entered the exact remaining balance of the debt I was forced to take on 4 years ago. I authorized the transfer. The loading icon spun for 3 seconds before a green confirmation banner illuminated the screen. Paid in full. The stolen $68,000 trust fund was recovered. The compound interest was neutralized. The predatory student loan was eradicated. Furthermore, the remaining surplus from the real estate flip left me with a staggering corporate portfolio. I had transformed their betrayal into my foundational wealth. Today, my ledger is impeccably balanced. I am entirely debt-free, operating a lucrative independent auditing firm. The universe corrected its own trajectory. Julian is currently facing multiple federal indictments for wire fraud and international money laundering. The offshore syndicates abandoned him the moment the institutional freeze hit. He is navigating the criminal justice system with a public defender because he possesses zero capital to hire private counsel. David and Susan moved into a cramped, one-bedroom rental apartment in a rundown industrial suburb. They rely entirely on their meager Social Security disbursements to cover their basic utilities. They have no country club memberships. They have no equity. They have no golden son to brag about. The pristine image they sacrificed my future to protect was shattered beyond repair. Protecting yourself means understanding that family is just a title, but liability is a fact. You cannot negotiate with people who view your future as a disposable resource. You can only secure your perimeter and let their own reckless choices orchestrate their downfall. If this reminded you that your boundaries are worth defending, drop a comment, hit subscribe, and I will see you in the next one. In every home, hidden beneath the floorboards and tucked behind the framed holiday photographs, there is a silent ledger. It does not track mortgages or grocery bills. It tracks emotional debts, unspoken favoritism, and the allocation of a parent's protective instinct. The story of Bella Thompson is a chilling masterclass in what happens when the architects of that ledger, the parents, corrupt the arithmetic of their own family. It forces us to pause and examine the very bedrock of how we raise our children, the values we project, and the catastrophic cost of choosing an illusion over the truth. Within the traditional framework of the American family, parents are tasked with a profound dual responsibility. They are expected to be both the providers of opportunity and the arbiters of justice. The expectation is that the sanctuary of the home will shield children from the predatory nature of the outside world. David and Susan Thompson failed this mandate not out of malice, but out of a tragic, blinding ego. Their story holds a mirror up to a specific cultural vulnerability: the relentless pressure to cultivate a pristine, successful image. In their pursuit of maintaining their suburban country club aesthetic, they sacrificed the foundational tenets of parenting: honesty, fairness, and emotional awareness. The tragedy of the Thompson family is rooted in the toxic dynamic of the golden child. In American culture, where entrepreneurial success is often worshipped as the ultimate validation of a family's legacy, it is alarmingly easy for parents to lose their perspective. Julian was presented as the visionary tech founder, the son who would elevate the family name. David and Susan became so intoxicated by the reflection of his fabricated success that they abandoned their duty to see him clearly. True emotional awareness in parenting requires looking at a child and recognizing their flaws, their struggles, and their failures. When they discovered Julian's offshore gambling addiction, their parental responsibility dictated a hard, painful intervention. Long-term guidance means allowing a child to fall so they can learn the vital mechanics of getting back up. Instead, David and Susan chose the path of enablement. They viewed his failure as their own social indictment. By quietly paying his bookies and leveraging their home equity, they robbed him of the accountability that forms a functioning adult. They shielded him from the consequences of his actions. And in doing so, they guaranteed his ultimate destruction. Enablement is not an act of love. It is an act of cowardice. It is a parent choosing their own immediate comfort over the difficult, grueling work of true rehabilitation. But the deepest failure of their parenting lies in the collateral damage of their choices. To sustain the illusion of the golden son, they had to cannibalize the quiet, dutiful daughter. Fairness is the cornerstone of a stable family unit. When parents arbitrarily strip one child of their resources to cushion another, they are not simply reallocating funds, they are communicating a devastating hierarchy of worth. When David told a 20-year-old Bella that her brother needed it more, he effectively erased her status as a daughter worthy of protection. He taught her that her security was expendable. This betrayal underscores the absolute necessity of honesty within the traditional family structure. A home built on secrets is a structure waiting to collapse. David and Susan lied about the Uniform Transfers to Minors Act account. They lied about the fake medical emergency to extort more capital. They lied to their friends, to Jessica's family, and ultimately to themselves. Children absorb the moral atmosphere of their upbringing. Julian learned that deception was a valid tool for survival because his parents financed his lies. Bella learned that trust was a liability because her parents weaponized it against her. The Thompsons did not just lose their home to a foreclosure auction. They forfeited the moral authority required to call themselves a family. Raising children requires a relentless commitment to equity. It demands that parents celebrate the quiet, steady achievements of the child who works 3 jobs to pay for statistics textbooks with the same fervor they reserve for the child who promises the world. Long-term guidance is about instilling resilience, not financing a facade. If David and Susan had possessed the emotional courage to say no to Julian, they might have faced a difficult year of rehabilitation and a temporary bruising of their social pride. Instead, by attempting to cheat the consequences of their son's choices, they lost their wealth, their home, and their daughter forever. Stories like this resonate so deeply because they touch the unspoken anxieties we all harbor about the people closest to us. They remind us that the titles of mother and father are not lifelong passes for immunity. They are daily contracts that must be honored through equitable actions and emotional truth. If you find yourself captivated by the quiet calculations of justice and the intricate dynamics of familial loyalty, this is your community. I encourage you to subscribe and follow the Elena Vengeance channel, where we continue to explore the complex, often shadowy corners of human relationships and the resilience it takes to balance the scales. As you step away from this story, take a moment to look at your own surroundings. Look at the dynamics playing out at your dinner table, during holiday gatherings, and in the quiet conversations behind closed doors. Who is being asked to carry the heavy, unseen burdens so that someone else can walk lightly? Are the sacrifices in your family distributed fairly, or is someone quietly subsidizing an illusion? The ledger of your own life is always running, tallying the debts of silence and the credits of honesty. You might not see the balance today, but sooner or later, the math always catches up. The only question is, when the invoice finally arrives, who will be the one expected to pay?